The feeling is indescribable when my family and I set foot in this small town. Everything seems peaceful, too peaceful, almost to the point of being eerie. The sun sets behind the distant hills, dyeing the sky a fiery red, making the entire space feel shrouded in a misty haze. The whole town seems to be in a deep slumber, with old houses standing still, not making a sound. It feels as though time has come to a halt here, and I can't escape this suffocating sensation. Moving here wasn't an easy decision. My new job required a change, a fresh start in an entirely unfamiliar environment. My wife, Clara, and our two young children, Emily and Jack, seemed hesitant about the idea of living in a place they weren't familiar with. But I believed this would be a good opportunity for all of us, even though some anxiety was inevitable. I still remember Clara's gaze as we drove through the winding roads, with no one in sight, just trees bent in strange shapes, as though they were bowing to welcome us to this place. The house we would live in is at the end of the town, an old house with sturdy stone walls and windows covered in moss. The roof had been ravaged by wind and time, yet it still stood firm, as though nothing could ever breach it. As we got closer, Clara looked at me with eyes full of worry, but I just smiled gently, trying to reassure her. "It's just an old house, dear," I said, though inside I wasn't so sure. The moment we stepped inside, I felt like I had entered another world. The air inside was so cold that I could feel each breath I took merging with the heavy silence. Everything in the house was misty and covered in dust, as if no one had lived here for a long time. The old paintings, the worn-out chairs, everything was covered in a layer of gloomy green moss. Only the sound of our footsteps seemed to break the stillness of the house. When I opened the window to let in some fresh air, the faint light from outside shone in, but was immediately swallowed by the darkness. A strange feeling surrounded me, as though this house held an inexplicable power. Something waiting for us, waiting for me. "Do you feel anything?" Clara asked, her voice trembling slightly, as though she too sensed the unease in this space. I didn't answer, just gently pulled her and the children toward the living room. But that unshakable feeling still clung to me, making me wonder, is this the place where we will begin our new life? Or is it just a dark place where the ghosts of the past will never let go? After moving our belongings into the house, Claire and I began the task of cleaning. Although the house was filled with dust and moss, I still felt a sense of familiarity, an indescribable feeling as if I had been here before, even though I clearly hadn't. Claire and I worked in silence with only the sounds of the dusting brushes and the creaking wood under each step. While cleaning, I discovered a few strange items. A small wooden table was placed in the corner of the living room, with long scratches as if it had been clawed at. On the table was a small wooden box without a lock, but I still felt a strange pull that made it impossible for me to ignore it. When I opened the box, I found an old photograph of a family, but their faces had been mysteriously erased, leaving only faint shadows. A chill ran down my spine as I stared at the photo. "Do you see this?" I called to Clara, my voice slightly trembling as I handed her the box. Clara took the box, lightly gliding over the photograph, then looked at me. "How strange. Why would they erase the faces in the photo?" she asked, but I couldn't answer. The eerie feeling inside me grew stronger. After cleaning for a while, we felt tired and decided to rest. As I sat down, I began to notice more small details in the house. The old paintings on the walls all depicted blurry scenes, faces that seemed ethereal, unclear. The wooden chairs looked as though they had endured centuries, with only a few scratch marks on their surface. The entire house felt like a forgotten part of the past, left behind in a world where time could not touch it. In the afternoon, while we were cleaning the yard, a few neighbors came by to welcome us to the neighborhood. I saw them from a distance, their slender figures walking slowly as if time moved very slowly for them. A middle-aged man stepped forward, a faint smile on his face, but his eyes were cold, as if he carried a secret that couldn't be revealed. "Hello, I'm Samuel," he said in a gravelly voice, with a tone of sadness, as if he had lived a long time in solitude. "We live right next door. If you need anything, don't hesitate." Clara nodded in response, but I felt uncomfortable. The feeling became more pronounced when I looked into Samuel's eyes. They held a strange light, as if he could see through everything, and I suddenly felt like I was being judged. as though he knew everything about me that I wasn't aware of. A woman stood beside him, her hair silver and face full of wrinkles, but her eyes sparkled, as though she had been through so much that no one could understand. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, but there was something serious in her tone. "Remember, this town has many things not everyone can understand." Her voice sounded like a warning, but then she smiled as if nothing was strange. Clara didn't seem to notice their behavior, but I couldn't shake that odd feeling. From their eyes to their voices, everything about them felt unnatural. They stood there too long, with no apparent urgency, as if they didn't want to leave. I felt like I was part of a play that I couldn't fully understand. When Samuel and the woman left, I watched them, feeling as if an invisible force was pulling them back to the house. They walked slowly, as if they didn't want to leave the house they had just visited. I turned to Clara, but she just smiled and said, "Our neighbors are so kind." I didn't say anything, but deep inside I felt that this house had a strange pull, and our neighbors were perhaps the only ones who truly understood the truth about this place. The cold of the first night in this house is unlike any place I've ever lived. As night fell, the house became eerily quiet. The sounds of insects outside seemed swallowed by the darkness, leaving only a dead, heavy silence. Clara had prepared a light dinner for us, but I felt like I couldn't eat, as if everything in this house had lost its natural flavor. I wished the children good night and closed their door, but when I returned to our room, I couldn't help but shiver when I saw the small wooden box I had discovered while cleaning. It was still on the table where I had left it, but somehow now it felt as though something had changed. The box, although I had closed it, was now slightly open in a strange way, as if someone had opened it while we weren't paying attention. I didn't want to think about it any further. The unease inside me grew, but there was nothing I could do except try to rest. Clara had gone to bed, but I just sat there staring into the darkness outside the window, listening to the wind howling through the cracks in the door and the sound of the floor creaking as if someone was walking through the house. As I closed my eyes, a strange noise startled me, causing me to jump. The floorboards creaked from the hallway. I opened my eyes and looked through the window, but saw nothing but darkness. I gently stood up, stepping outside, trying not to wake Clara. My footsteps echoed in the stillness of the house, but the farther I went, the more I felt as though someone was standing near me, watching every move I made. The hallway to the living room was pitch black. Only the faint moonlight from outside filtered through the window. I stopped when I heard a whisper, light as the wind. The words were unclear, as if someone was calling my name from a great distance. I turned around but saw only the dark emptiness. At that moment, a cold chill swept over me, as though a cold draft had blown through me. I felt goosebumps, but I tried not to wake Clara. But when I returned to the bedroom, something strange happened. The door to the children's room, which I had made sure to close earlier, was now slightly ajar. My heart tightened, and I hurried toward the door. My pulse raced as I looked into the room, where only darkness enveloped it, with no light at all. "Emily? Jack?" I whispered, my voice trembling. There was no reply. I stepped into the children's room, feeling as though a shadow was standing there. But when I turned on the light, there was nothing. Both children were still fast asleep, their innocent faces unaware of the anxiety tearing at my heart. I turned back and looked at the wooden box on the table. That strange feeling came rushing back. This was the first time I had seen the box opened in such a peculiar way. Though no one was in the house, something had clearly changed. And then I realized something. The photograph in the box, the one with the faces erased, was no longer blurry. Although still faint, I could see a person in the photograph staring directly at me, their eyes now clear and filled with obsession. A chill rose inside me, as though I had witnessed something that could never be erased from my mind. At that moment, I heard the whisper again, this time louder, as though someone was standing right behind me. "You can't escape." A sensation of being trapped tightened around me. Cold sweat beaded on my forehead, and before I could turn around, Clara's voice suddenly came from the bedroom. "What are you doing? Are you okay?" I didn't dare answer immediately. There was only one thing I knew for sure. This house was not like the places we had lived before. It held something dark, and I didn't know if we would ever leave here. without being affected by that darkness. It took me a long time to fall asleep. All night I tossed and turned, unable to shake the feeling of being watched, as if invisible eyes were constantly following my every move. Clara slept soundly, but I knew she wasn't comfortable either. Although she tried to hide it, I could still sense the tension in every breath she took. When I woke up, the faint light of the morning was just beginning to filter through the old curtains, casting a cold mist over the room. The chill from the night still lingered in the air, and the house seemed unable to shake off the ghosts of the night before. Clara was still fast asleep, her breathing steady, but I couldn't bear the dark, oppressive atmosphere surrounding this place. I stood up, pulled the blanket off, and walked into the cold space of the house. Outside, the scene was strangely quiet. There were no car sounds, no voices or laughter, just a thin layer of mist covering this small town. The old houses with moss-covered roofs looked like sleeping monsters, heavy and silent. The wind howled through the cracks in the old windows, like the endless sighs of the house. I stepped outside, and the only sound in the empty space was the echo of my footsteps on the rough asphalt road. The thin, bare branches of the ancient trees swayed in the wind, creaking like sorrowful moans. I began to jog, trying to shake off the unwanted thoughts in my mind. But before long, I felt a strange presence behind me, a shadowy figure I couldn't make out, but I could feel it. A cold gust of wind blew past, making my skin crawl. It wasn't the cold of the weather, but the chill of something inexplicable. Though I tried to ignore it, the soft sound of footsteps behind me continued steadily, neither loud nor soft, but enough for me to know that someone was following me. For the first time, I turned around and saw the figure of a man, walking slowly with a cold expression and no sense of urgency. He seemed indifferent to me, but each time I looked back, I saw him there, the distance between us unchanged. I tried to speed up, but my legs felt heavy, as if the ground beneath me was clinging to each step. The sound of my footsteps echoed down the empty road, but the footsteps of the man behind me remained constant. No matter how fast I ran, I still felt as though he was right behind me. I panted heavily, pushing myself to go faster. The feeling of confusion began to overwhelm me. The shadows of the trees stretched long across the ground, forming strange shapes in the weak light of the sun. I looked ahead, trying to make out the quiet road, but when I turned around again, the man was still there. He hadn't changed his pace, wasn't getting closer, but he wasn't leaving either. Cold sweat ran down my spine, but I couldn't stop. The sensation of being watched by invisible eyes kept me from feeling calm. Suddenly, I heard a strange sound, like dry leaves being crushed underfoot. I turned around, but there was no one. It felt as if someone was standing in the darkness, just staring at me, but I couldn't make out who they were. I decided to stop and take a deep breath, trying to calm myself. The figure hadn't followed me, but I could still feel that he was standing there, unmoving. I turned away and decided to head back. But when I looked back one last time, the figure had vanished. No trace. I didn't know if he had really existed or not, but that strange feeling still haunted me, clinging tightly to my mind. When I returned to the house, the atmosphere inside was just as quiet, as if nothing had changed. Clara had woken up, and when she saw me, she gently asked, "Are you okay?" I just nodded, but deep down, I knew that something was silently watching us, an invisible presence that couldn't be ignored. And I wondered if we would be able to live here without being swallowed by the darkness in this house or by the people around us. I nodded, trying to make small talk. "Yes, my family and I just moved here. We're staying in the house at the end of the street. The old house." He stopped wiping the glass and stared at me for a long moment, as though considering whether he should say something. Then he sighed, set the glass down, and began to speak in a whisper. "That house, well, don't get caught up in its past. The old owner, Mr. Harris, was a strange man. They say he lived there alone. No one ever visited, and only a few people in town ever saw him. But what's odd is that when he suddenly disappeared one night, no one knew where he went. The house became cold after that, and no one dared live there. People say he found something in that house, but no one knows what." I listened in silence, a strange sense of fear rising within me. "Why did no one dare live there?" I asked, trying to remain calm. The man looked around the cafe as if to make sure no one could overhear, then lowered his voice. There are many rumors. People say the house carries a curse. No one can stay there for long, and those who do feel like something is watching them. But you know, these are just stories. No one really knows what happened. All I know is that Mr. Harris, he never came back. I felt a shiver run down my spine. This story didn't seem like mere gossip from a small town. I could sense the seriousness in the man's eyes, the anxiety in his voice. It felt like I had touched something dark and mysterious, but I couldn't stop. So, who was Mr. Harris? What did he find in that house? I asked, my voice trembling slightly from curiosity and the inexplicable fear. The man paused, then simply shook his head. I don't know. I've only heard that he once said, "It's waiting for me," but those were his last words before he vanished. No one knows where he went, and after that, the house was left with nothing but cold walls. As I stood up to leave, the man added one more thing, his voice hoarse, full of warning. Just remember one thing, never open the basement door. If you want to live in peace, don't go searching for what happened in that house. Stepping out of the cafe, I felt like a weight had been placed on my chest. The unease once again took over me. The story about Mr. Harris and the rumors surrounding that house felt like a thick veil surrounding things I couldn't understand. But one thing I knew for sure, I couldn't ignore these warnings. That house and the ghosts of the past would not easily let anyone go. I hurriedly stepped out of the hut, my mind confused and filled with anxiety. The strange discoveries here, from the photograph identical to the one in the house, to the faint bloodstains, all made me feel that something was wrong. The smell of damp earth, the cold atmosphere from the towering trees, all intensified my fear. It felt as though I had unknowingly trespassed into a place that didn't belong to me, a place where the memories and ghosts of the past still lingered. As I turned to leave and started walking down the trail, I tried to calm myself, but with each step I felt heavier. The atmosphere in this forest was oppressive, as if it was closing in around me. A cold gust of wind blew through, making me shudder. Despite my effort to keep my mind focused and not look back, I felt a strange pull, as though something was watching me from behind. Then suddenly a bird call rang out, sharp and unexpected, like a scream coming from deep within the forest. The sound wasn't natural, it was like a warning, a strange call. It wasn't the cheerful chirp of a bird, but a broken, unsettling sound, as if something unusual was hiding in the darkness of the woods. The bird's call echoed through the quiet space, as though it was reaching out from the dark branches, making me feel haunted, unable to shake off the feeling. A chill ran down my spine as I realized that the sound wasn't from any bird I had ever heard. It was an eerie call, like a reminder from another world, a force I couldn't understand. I didn't dare look back, but my steps quickened, my desire to escape the forest growing stronger. The trees around me seemed to bend down, and the shadows from the low branches stretched out, as if they wanted to swallow me whole. I kept walking, my legs shaking, but with each step, the feeling that I was being chased, being watched from behind, grew stronger. When I finally stepped out of the forest, the faint light of the afternoon had completely vanished. I stood at the edge of the forest, looking at the house in the distance, feeling a small sense of relief. But as I turned back to glance at the forest, I suddenly noticed something strange. The trees behind me seemed motionless, no wind blowing through them. The silence was absolute, as though there was no movement, no sound at all from the dark forest. I couldn't shake off the feeling that invisible eyes were watching me from deep within the forest, even though no one was there. The bird calls continued, fading away, but they still lingered in my mind. An eerie sense of unease kept me from feeling at peace. Something was certainly in that forest, something I couldn't comprehend, but it was so close, just out of sight. I didn't want to linger any longer, so I hurried into the house and locked the door behind me. Claire and the children were gathered in the living room, and everything seemed normal. But inside, I couldn't shake the strange feeling that still clung to me. I couldn't understand why, but I felt that the forest behind this house, with its strange sounds and the traces I had just reaching for the generator switch. There was definitely something in this house that kept me on edge. My hand brushed against something hard and I shuddered when I realized I had found the generator. I flipped the switch, but still, there was no light. The unease inside me grew stronger. I stood there in the dark, feeling like the space around me was tightening. Just as I crouched down to check the generator's connections, a sound came from behind me, as if someone was walking closer. I turned around, my heart pounding, and I froze when I saw a shadowy figure standing not far from me. A tall man with indistinct features under the dim light. There was no sound, only his gaze, a cold stare, locked on me. Who are you? I asked, my voice hoarse with fear, but the man didn't answer. He just stood there, his eyes seeming to pierce through me, as if he were not human. A sense of terror spread through me, rendering me unable to move. The man stood there for what felt like an eternity, motionless, as if waiting for something. But when I took a step back, wanting to run outside, he suddenly vanished, as if he had dissolved into the air. I barely saw his shadow slide through the darkness before he completely disappeared. My limbs were trembling, but I dared not stay in the darkness any longer. I hastily turned the generator back on, and this time, the light from the lamp immediately illuminated me, dispelling the darkness that had surrounded me. But I could not shake the strange feeling. In that moment, I knew for sure that this house didn't just contain the ghosts of the past. There was something dark, something always lingering around us. When I returned to the living room, Clara and the children were sitting at the table, the lights back on, but my face clearly betrayed the panic I felt. Clara looked at me, her eyes full of concern. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, but I could see the worry in her eyes. I just nodded, but inside there was something I couldn't say. The shadow of that strange man still haunted me, and I knew that this was just the beginning of a mystery we couldn't escape. The dinner ended in eerie silence. Clara and the kids had finished eating and had returned to their usual activities, but I couldn't shake the heavy feeling in my chest. The strange events in the forest and the shadowy figure of the man still left me bewildered. This house, despite having only lived in it for less than a week, already felt like it was slowly taking over my mind. After experiencing the strange feeling that morning, I decided to go into the town to calm the thoughts that were troubling my mind. Clara and the kids were still at home, and I needed some space to settle down. This small town didn't have much foot traffic. The narrow streets, the old houses, and the empty shops all seemed to have been forgotten by time. The streetlights only shone weakly, as if they wanted to avoid drawing anyone's attention. When I passed by a small cafe, I decided to step in. The warmth inside contrasted sharply with the cold that had seeped into me from the streets outside. The bell above the door jingled, and I noticed the gazes of the people in the cafe shifting toward me. A few elderly people sat at a table, their eyes filled with curiosity and contemplation, as if they had seen me many times before, even though I had only arrived here yesterday. I walked up to the bar where a middle-aged man was wiping glasses. He glanced at me, then smiled without any warmth. "New to town, huh?" he asked, his voice deep and somewhat hesitant. I nodded, trying to make small talk. "Yes, my family and I just moved here. We're staying in the house at the end of the street. The old house." He stopped wiping the glass and stared at me for a long moment, as though considering whether he should say something. Then he sighed, set the glass down, and began to speak in a whisper. "That house, well, don't get caught up in its past. The old owner, Mr. Harris, was a strange man. They say he lived there alone. No one ever visited, and only a few people in town ever saw him. But what's odd is that when he suddenly disappeared one night, no one knew where he went. The house became cold after that, and no one dared live there. People say he found something in that house, but no one knows what." I listened in silence, a strange sense of fear rising within me. "Why did no one dare live there?" I asked, trying to remain calm. The man looked around the cafe as if to make sure no one could overhear, then lowered his voice. "There are many rumors. People say the house carries a curse. No one can stay there for long, and those who do feel like something is watching them. But you know, these are just stories. No one really knows what happened. All I know is that Mr. Harris, he never came back." I felt a shiver run down my spine. This story didn't seem like mere gossip from a small town. I could sense the seriousness in the man's eyes, the anxiety in his voice. It felt like I had touched something dark and mysterious, but I couldn't stop. So, who was Mr. Harris? What did he find in that house? I asked, my voice trembling slightly from curiosity and the inexplicable fear. The man paused, then simply shook his head. I don't know. I've only heard that he once said, "It's waiting for me." But those were his last words before he vanished. No one knows where he went. And after that, the house was left with nothing but cold walls. As I stood up to leave, just remember one thing. Never open the basement door. If you want to live in peace, don't go searching for what happened in that house. Stepping out of the cafe, I felt like a weight had been placed on my chest. The unease once again took over me. The story about Mr. Harris and the rumors surrounding that house felt like a thick veil, surrounding things I couldn't understand. But one thing I knew for sure, I couldn't ignore these warnings. That house and the ghosts of the past would not easily let anyone go. After experiencing the strange feeling that morning, I decided to go into town to calm the thoughts that were troubling my mind. Clara and the kids were still at home, and I needed some space to settle down. This small town didn't have much foot traffic. The narrow streets, the old houses, and the empty shops all seemed to have been forgotten by time. The streetlights only shone weakly, as if they wanted to avoid drawing anyone's attention. When I passed by a small cafe, I decided to step in. The warmth inside contrasted sharply with the cold that had seeped into me from the streets outside. The bell above the door jingled, and I noticed the gazes of the people in the cafe shifting toward me. A few elderly people sat at a table, their eyes filled with curiosity and contemplation, as if they had seen me many times before, even though I had only arrived here yesterday. I walked up to the bar where a middle-aged man was wiping glasses. He glanced at me, then smiled without any warmth. "New to town, huh?" he asked, his voice deep and somewhat hesitant. The strange noises, the feeling of being watched, it all made it impossible for me to feel at peace. When dinner ended, the lights in the house suddenly went out again. At first, I thought it was a problem with our generator, but after checking, I realized that it had run out of gas. A sense of discomfort surged within me, and Clara looked at me with a worried expression. "Is the generator broken?" Clara asked, her voice filled with concern. I nodded. "Maybe it's just old and can't keep going. I'll get more gas tomorrow morning." Meanwhile, Clara became more anxious. "So we can only use candles?" I nodded and quickly took a few candles from the cupboard, placing them around the room. The dim light from the candles wasn't enough to illuminate the large room, but at least it pushed the darkness back a little. The shadows of the furniture in the house suddenly came to life, as if they were watching our every movement. I didn't feel comfortable at all. We sat around the dining table trying to talk to ease the tension, but the heavy, gloomy atmosphere never seemed to dissipate. Clara and the children seemed not to notice much, but I could feel the unease spreading in the air. Suddenly, from outside the window, I heard a strange sound, a rustling, as if someone was walking outside in the yard. I stood up, my gaze shifting to the window. The darkness outside seemed thicker, and nothing could be seen clearly except the trees swaying in the wind. But then for a moment, I saw a figure, faintly visible between the branches. It was a man, standing silently at the door, his black eyes staring straight at me. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Clara," I whispered, but I didn't dare raise my voice. "There's someone outside the door." Clara stood up, worried. "Are you sure? Who is it?" I didn't answer, just moved closer to the front door. I knew I had to go outside to check, although the strange feeling still clung to me. Each step made the atmosphere feel heavier. When I got closer to the door, the man's figure was still there, unmoving, his eyes still fixed on me, as if he was waiting for something. I stopped for a moment, peering through the crack in the door, but saw nothing but darkness. The man was still standing there, too close, yet too far. A strange sensation kept me from stepping forward. However, I couldn't stand it any longer. I had to go outside and face this. Gripping the door latch, I pulled it open and stepped outside. The light from the candles inside spilled out, but it wasn't enough to illuminate the area around me. Just a few steps outside the door, I saw the man still standing silently, but the light from inside couldn't reach him. He was only a faint shadow, standing still like a figure in the darkness. I stepped closer, calling out loudly, "Hey, is someone out there?" But as I got closer, the man's figure suddenly dissolved into the air, as if he had never been there. I stopped, not understanding what was happening. No trace, no sound. Only me standing in the darkness, silent with an indescribable fear. I looked around, my eyes trying to find any trace of the figure, but there was nothing but the thick darkness. No footprints, no sounds. That man, like so many strange things in this house, was nothing but a ghost, an illusion that couldn't be grasped. When I returned to the house, Clara was standing at the door, looking at me with concern in her eyes. "Are you okay? Did you see someone?" I didn't say anything, just shook my head, trying to push the fear away. But one thing I knew for sure was that something strange was happening, and I couldn't understand. The ghost of the wouldn't leave us in peace. I turned back inside, locked the door, and tried to shake off the fear. But deep down, I knew that we would never be at peace in this house. That night after the power outage, the strange sounds and the shadowy figure outside the door kept me from being able to sleep. All night I tossed and turned in bed, my mind filled with bizarre images. The strange man, whom I had thought was just a hallucination, now lingered like a ghost that couldn't be shaken from my thoughts. He seemed not just to be a stranger, but part of a story I couldn't escape. I heard the wind howling through the window, the trees rustling as though whispering words I couldn't understand. The light from the candles wasn't enough to dispel the darkness in the house. The house was silent, but in my mind the feelings of fear kept repeating, pressing down on me. And then, once again, I heard footsteps outside the door. Unable to suppress both my curiosity and my fear, I stood up, opened the door, and walked down the hallway. Everything in the house was still quiet, but I felt a strange presence surrounding me, something uncomfortable, as if someone was waiting for me from somewhere in the darkness. When I got closer to the front door, I suddenly noticed a figure standing outside. I couldn't make it out clearly, only seeing the shadowy outline of a man, still standing there, as if watching me. A wave of terror surged within me, but I couldn't just stand there, staring at him like I had before. Who are you?" I shouted, my voice trembling, but still trying to remain calm. He didn't answer, just stood there, staring at me as if assessing every movement I made. For the first time, I noticed something terrifying in his gaze. It wasn't the look of an ordinary person, but something I couldn't name, as if he had existed for a very long time and had witnessed things that I couldn't comprehend. "What do you want?" I asked again, my voice beginning to show signs of worry, but he still didn't move. I hesitated, stepped closer, and the more I moved forward, the more I felt as though I was being drawn into the darkness. And when I took one more step, suddenly he spoke. "Don't come closer," he said, his voice hoarse as if it hadn't been used in a long time. "What you are looking for, you will never understand." A wave of terror rose within me, but I couldn't stop myself. I took another step, now only a few inches away from him. At that moment, I saw his face clearly. Pale skin, deep-set eyes like two endless black holes. The cracks and scars on his face made me feel like he had lived for centuries. And then he smiled, a cold and threatening smile. Just as I was about to speak again, a noise from inside the house made me turn my head. When I looked back, the man's figure had disappeared, like smoke in the night. I stood still, unable to understand what had just happened. He had been there just a few steps away, but now there was nothing but darkness. I ran back into the house, slammed the door shut, and rushed into the living room, where Clara and the kids were sitting. Clara stood up and she saw the panic on my face. "Are you okay? Did you see someone?" I couldn't answer immediately. I just shook my head, trying to steady my breathing. Everything inside me felt shattered. I didn't know if I was losing my mind, but the shadow of that man, with his strange warnings and that haunting gaze, still lingered in my mind. And I knew one thing clearly: my family and I were not safe here. The next morning, I woke up in a panic. Everything I had experienced the night before, the shadow of the man, the strange warnings, felt like nightmare. The house was still quiet, nothing had changed. Clara and the children were eating breakfast. Everything was as normal as if nothing had happened. I sat up in bed gasping for breath, my hands drenched in sweat. It felt like I was still trapped in the dream, but I couldn't be sure. The details of the man, his cold stare, the strange warnings couldn't possibly be real. Maybe I had dreamt it. It had to have been a dream. I stood up, stepped outside the room, and looked around the house. Everything was the same, but one thing I knew, whether it was a dream or reality, that feeling of fear still lingered in me. And this house, no matter how much I tried to deny it, contained something very strange, something terrifying that I couldn't explain. The next day, I couldn't shake the bizarre images from the previous night. The uneasy feelings, the strange traces in the house. They clung to me like a shadow. Clara and the children had no idea what had happened. They went on living as usual, but I couldn't rid myself of the anxiety within. The feeling of being pursued relentlessly led me to do something I never thought I would. I had to confront that strange man. I decided to follow, to stalk, and find out who he really was and why he had appeared in my family's life, in this house. That afternoon, as the sun began to set behind the hills, I went outside, quietly watching from the window. Our house, located near the forest, remained in a stillness, but I felt an invisible force pulling me outside. I waited, observing from a safe distance. As the sky grew darker, the figure appeared again, this time not at the window, but near the graveyard, a place I hadn't noticed before. He appeared, standing next to an old grave near the forest area behind the house. This time, I didn't rush over, but stood still, watching. The man, tall, wearing an old coat, hands in his pockets, took slow steps toward the grave. I could see clearly now. His face was no longer cold like before. Instead, he appeared patient, his empty eyes full of emotion, as if he was facing an old memory he couldn't let go of. At that moment, I decided to move closer, finding a spot to hide behind the bushes near the grave. The feelings of fear and curiosity haunted me, but I couldn't stop. I crept closer, moving quietly, not making a sound. Then I heard him speak, his voice hoarse, as if he was talking to someone. "Darling, I still remember you. I've come back, even though I know you're no longer here. All that remains is this land, but I still can't forget. I'm sorry for not being able to do more for you." He stood still, his eyes staring at the grave, as if seeking forgiveness from a soul that no longer existed. Suddenly, I realized that this man was not a ghost from the past, but just a man carrying deep sorrow and irreparable loss. He continued standing there, his hands clenched, as if the longing for his deceased wife was keeping him from letting go. I couldn't help but feel a sense of sympathy for him, although I still felt fear. I quietly stepped back, not wanting to disturb him in that moment. I understood now. He was not a dangerous stranger, but a man in pain, returning to visit the grave of his beloved wife. And what I thought was a strange presence was actually the ghost of memories, of a man who couldn't let go of the past. I stood there for a long while, watching as the man finally turned away, walking into the darkness. He didn't look back, didn't glance at me. He disappeared into the night, as if he had come and gone silently, a part of the past I could not understand. When I returned to the house, Clara was preparing dinner, and the children were happily playing in the living room. I sat down, silent, unable to share with them what I had just experienced. A part of me felt relieved to understand that the man wasn't a danger, but another part of me felt empty, as if I had witnessed something so profound that I couldn't find a way to explain it. This house, with all its secrets and dark memories, still hadn't let me go. But today I understood that the ghosts I felt weren't always the things we fear. Sometimes they are just pains that haven't healed, memories that cannot be released. The next morning, I still couldn't shake off the strange feeling from the night before. The shadow of the man, the encounter with Jonathan. It all made it impossible for me to get rid of the restlessness in my heart. The whole town, though oddly peaceful, harbored too many mysteries that I couldn't explain. I tried to act as if nothing had happened, but the anxiety within me never eased. The story of Jonathan and Caroline, although it brought me a sense of relief, opened another path. one where the secrets of the house and the town still remained unsolved. Even though I knew that Jonathan wasn't a vengeful ghost, but a man in sorrow, I couldn't stop thinking about his cold stare and the feeling that there was something hidden behind these events. The ghosts, whether of memories or reality, continued to linger in every corner of this house. I decided to go outside to feel the fresh air and find some peace. The town was still as quiet as usual, but today the atmosphere felt heavier. As I walked along the small path leading to the cafe, I encountered Mrs. Maureen again. Her eyes gleamed with understanding as she looked at me, as if she knew I was seeking more explanation about the strange things I had witnessed. "Did you see what you needed to see?" she asked, her voice gentle but full of implication. I didn't know how to respond. I simply shook my head. "The things I've seen and felt still can't be explained. It feels like this house and this town have something haunting." Mrs. Maureen looked at me for a long time, then said, "Yes, this town has ghosts that no one can escape from. They are not just the spirits of the dead, but memories and losses that stretch across time. There are things you can't see, but they're still here, hiding in every house, in every street." I stood still, feeling a dark truth I couldn't fully comprehend. Mrs. Maureen continued, "You must have heard other stories in this town, events that no one can explain. There are families who have lived here for generations, but each time they leave, they carry with them an unanswered question. The house you live in is just one of many such places." I felt a wave of unease rising within me. This town, though outwardly peaceful, hid too many mysteries that I couldn't understand. The stories, the ghosts, weren't just from the past. They continued to cling to the present. Things that couldn't be explained were still waiting to be revealed, and I knew I wouldn't be able to leave this place easily without carrying those questions with me. When I returned to the house, the atmosphere inside hadn't changed. Clara and the children were happily playing in the living room, but I felt a quiet fear still surrounding me. The shadow of the strange man, the coldness from the trees in the forest, all created a picture I couldn't fully repaint. But there was one thing I knew for sure. No matter how many unsolved stories there were, no matter how many mysteries remained unexplored, could we live in harmony with the unknown? The light from the window reflected on the house's rugged walls, and in that brief moment, I felt like I was part of a larger story that I couldn't yet understand. Perhaps the secrets in this house would never be solved, but one thing I couldn't deny was that they would continue to haunt us until we decided to face them. I sat silently, feeling like I had just heard the story of an old friend. Mrs. Maureen's words made me feel the pain and love Jonathan had for Caroline. It wasn't a romantic love, but a profound love that couldn't be separated. Jonathan couldn't let go, couldn't live without her. "So he still comes back every year?" I asked, my voice choked. Mrs. Maureen nodded. "Yes, every year in the fall, when the leaves fall and the air turns cold. He can't forget her, and perhaps that grave is the only place where he still feels close to Caroline." I sat there for a while, not knowing what to say. Jonathan's love for Caroline wasn't something that could be understood by reason. It was a deep, painful emotion, making it impossible for him to move on, even after she was gone. "It's a pity," I whispered. "It's a pity he couldn't move on, couldn't find new joy." Mrs. Maureen smiled gently. For Jonathan, the only joy was the memory of Caroline. Some people can't forget the past, and for him, the past is everything. I stood up, feeling a deep sympathy for the man I had met in the forest. Perhaps he was just a man living with his past, with a love he couldn't let go of. I no longer felt fear or doubt. This house, with all its mysteries and ghosts, was not a scary place. It was just a place where memories and love couldn't be left behind. When I returned to the house, I no longer felt uneasy. I couldn't change Jonathan's past, but I could cherish the moments I had with my family. And perhaps the most important thing was learning to let go of what couldn't be changed. Although I had unraveled part of what had happened, there was still an unease I couldn't shake off. This house, with its ghosts of the past and unsolved secrets, wasn't just where I found the sad memories of Jonathan. It was part of something bigger, a story that this town seemed to be hiding. As I sat down and looked out the window, The gray clouds in the sky seemed like a veil, hiding things still unknown. This town, with its deceptive peace, was just a shell, hiding deep secrets buried in the ground. The house I lived in, and what happened in the forest behind it, was just a small piece of a larger story. Mrs. Marine's words echoed in my mind. There are things you can't see, but they're still there, lurking in every house, in every street. Did she know about all the strange things in this town? Are there other secrets waiting for me to uncover? This town wasn't a place I simply came to for a fresh start. It was part of a bigger story that I couldn't yet fully understand. And perhaps my family and I would not only have to face the mysteries of this house, but also the untold stories of those who had lived here before. The traces of the past that we couldn't easily erase. I didn't know if I was ready to face what was to come, but I knew one thing for sure. This house wasn't our final destination. There were many more untold stories in this town, and I had a feeling they would soon find their way to us, like a cold breeze, gentle yet irresistible. I couldn't escape the feeling that the ghosts of the past were still watching for me. In every corner of this town. These stories haven't ended. This is only the beginning of a long journey, and this town, with all its unsolved mysteries, will always haunt us. Nothing is